How y'all doing? Good, good. First to thank Dr. Evans for this invite and thank her and her husband for not being divorced and making me look bad after she tells everybody that I was responsible for them being connected today. And thank Clark Atlanta University for this series of seminars and for welcoming, I guess I'm the only one not from CAU up here today. But I would appreciate it. And, not only welcoming myself, but also my students. Shout out Atlanta University Panthers. Georgia State University Panthers. How y'all doing? Du Bois has always been one of my models for scholarship. I can remember as I was working on my dissertation, one of the things that I read at that time was The Souls of Black Folk, and I can remember wishing that I could write as eloquently, wishing that I could put words together in the way that Du Bois did. So always that model. But as I thought about this particular seminar, I was wondering, well, what else, beyond the personal and the personal desire to model yourself after what I believe is probably the premier genius of the 20th century. What can we learn from the work of W.E.B. Du Bois, particularly in the field that I teach in, Africana Studies, African American Studies? I think that this research that we're discussing here is a powerful example of some very significant research, even though it was done over 100 years ago. I think that there are some lessons that we as scholars can learn from this research. First of all, even before all the books were written about it, even before Dr. Maulana Karenga or Dr. Molefe Asante, Du Bois was teaching his students through practice about African-centered research. I think everybody who's here has noted that every aspect, and I'll be talking about this again when I hone in a little bit on this particular piece of research, but every aspect of the research that Dr. Du Bois did in this particular piece always begins with Africa, always connects Black people in the United States to the context of Africa. So long before that word was put on paper, the idea of African-centered research was an extremely important aspect of what he did. The importance of grounding the experiences of Black people in America to African culture, African history, African knowledge. That's something that we think of as only beginning with the development of Black studies, but that's the first most important lesson we can learn. Secondly, I think the importance of transdisciplinary research. Du Bois, as I said, I believe again that he is I guess maybe he and Einstein were running neck and neck for the 20th century. But the idea of transdisciplinary research at the height of the modern age, when the idea of discipline was so important, where everybody protected their little fields, where psychologists or sociologists or historians all stayed in their box and no one ever crossed over. Dr. Du Bois had his students working in terms of transdisciplinary work across the borders of history, of sociology, of psychology, of religious studies, and then making all those areas reconnect to discover new knowledge. I think thirdly, Dr. Du Bois' research teaches us, again, decades and decades before someone gives a name to this, but back in the 80s, Black feminist and womanist scholars began to teach us about the importance of intersectionality. And again, the thing that we can see in this research is that Dr. Du Bois considers the intersectionality of the Black experience. He's not just concerned about the question of race and racism, but in every piece of this research, he considers race, class, gender, and how that is impacting what the scholars are saying and how it impacts the subject of their study, which is the Black community. And so again, I mean, as we think about this, this is a man who, again, he deserves this idea that I'm putting forward, the premier genius of the 20th century, because he's teaching us, he's paving a road long before Africana Studies becomes an official discipline, long before you can get a degree in this field. He's showing us how to do the research. And then, I think, beyond this idea of intersectionality, the work of Dr. Du Bois, and I think it shows not only in this research, but of course in what comes out of it. I think this particular paper on the Black family was presented, or the conference happened in 1908. And just a few years after that, 1911, Dr. Du Bois would participate in what, the Niagara Conference, and the founding of the NAACP. So we know that Dr. Du Bois was always concerned about being an activist. He taught us the idea of being a scholar activist, that your scholarship has to have purpose beyond getting you that tenure. Your scholarship has to have purpose beyond getting you that next raise, or making it so that you don't get your pay cut. Your scholarship has to have some significance to the people who you are engaging in that scholarship with. Years later, within NCBS, the National Council of Black Studies, that was coined as having a value for academic excellence and social responsibility. In other words, we as scholars have a responsibility to be academically excellent. I try to teach my own students this, that, this is not slipshod work. This is not work that we, I'm always curious when students come to me. I'm the director of undergraduate studies, who want to talk about changing their major to African American studies because they need to get out of school quicker, or somebody told them that, maybe you Black, you should be able to take this and pass pretty easy, right? And then they get surprised. They get surprised, because why? Because if we are going in the Du Boisian tradition, we are focused on academic excellence. We're focused on true scholarship, but also that true scholarship has to be connected to social responsibility. There's a purpose to our scholarship which moves beyond our own personal advantage, which moves beyond our own personal goals that we're trying to achieve, and that is that social responsibility. Dr. Du Bois, in the work he's doing here, and the fact that this work then gets applied to what? It gets put into the database of the NAACP. It gets put into the database of other social organizations as they begin trying to figure out. This particular piece, to me, and if you haven't taken a chance, for those of you who are sociologists, who are interested in family studies, it's a powerful piece. The Negro family in America, and one of the things that I reflected on as I looked at it is that Dr. Du Bois had a lot of practice with this right out of his own graduate program when he did the work on the Philadelphia Negro. And I don't know if you've ever seen the volume. The first time I actually saw that is I was in Accra in Ghana, West Africa, at Dr. Du Bois' home. And there's a copy, and I'm thinking, okay, it's supposed to be a book, but it's an encyclopedia, right? And when you think that he did this research when he's still in his 20s, so he had practice on putting this research together. But what strikes you is the powerful detail on Black family life. He looks at every aspect of Black family life, from how homes are constructed, to people's sexual mores and sexual practices, to gender relationships, to the question of religion. He always goes back to questions of religious practices, to the impact of economics on family life, and also how the economic system impacts the social class structure of the families that he's doing research on. One of the things I found most amazing here is he looks at the fact, I think he says that there were, I think close to 3 million acres or 30 million acres of land that was under the control of black families. He's looking at those kinds of issues and looking at how that control of land becomes so significant, but then he breaks it down in terms of family structure and family household, what the income of each of those are. That becomes important. But then he goes down to micro look. He looks at individual families and family structures, right? What does it look like to be a family in a 2-bedroom house? What's it look like to be a family in a 3-bedroom house? How does that impact? So he's, again, the things that he's interested in are things that many of us probably only comes about with postmodern ideas in terms of what I would call, contextualization. How all these things impact what we look at. And what it's interesting to me is that unlike Daniel Moynihan, or even his professor, E. Franklin Frazier, Dr. Du Bois, with all this research, never blames the victim. Dr. Du Bois does not look at the conditions of black people, even when he's discussing questions like the morality of black people, or in his section on sexuality, he does a whole listing. I think he looks back 100 years previous to this research, and he looks at what they call illegitimate birth rates. Right? And based upon that reading, he says, obviously, this is a problem within the black community. He looks at the high divorce rate amongst black people that's occurring, but he doesn't blame these situations that he names as problems on questions of morality. He looks at the social conditions that are impacting these problems. He looks at, well, what does the economy have to do with that? He even looks at something that very few people looked at during that time. He looks at the role of mobility and migration. At that time, primarily migration from the countryside to the city. And one thing he realizes is that because of employment needs, more and more black women are moving from the country to the city, which is leaving the men in the country. And he's saying that all of these things are powerful to impacting what he's observing. So again, he does not blame the victim. He looks at the context. He looks again at intersectionality, how race, class, and gender impact the experiences that he sees in black people. And then finally, I think, again, talking about the lessons that we can learn from the work of Dr. Du Bois, I think that, again, once again, even long before it's said, Dr. Manning Marable said that at its best, black studies is descriptive. It describes the situation that the scholar is looking at. It describes in detail those things that the scholar is looking. He says that at its best, black studies is corrective. All right? It offers a correction for the particular situation that's going on, and at its best, black studies is prescriptive. It gives a prescription. It offers an alternative worldview to what is seen. So in other words, black studies, unlike so many people believe, is not about doom and gloom and woe is me and how bad life is, but it says, this is our situation, let's describe it. Let's be unemotional and describe what it is we see. But let's also create some structures to correct, and we'll talk about that more. Even I think in this, at the end, he talks about a unity between the black church and the black family as a corrective, and then it offers a prescription, an alternative worldview, an alternative view for what things could be like. And so again, I think beyond even interest in these particular pieces of research, the power for me in Dr. Du Bois is that beyond the 19th century in which he came, beyond the 20th century through which he lived, I think those of us living in the 21st century have some powerful lessons to learn as we also try to be the most excellent in our academic research and in the work that we do in our community.